Presented by Vishal Agarwal. Vishalji.
Namaste and Hari Om and Pranam to all the sadhvis, sadhus, acharyas, panditjis and to everyone else. I'm the father of a high schooler boy and an elementary school daughter. And a lot of this presentation is based on my experience in dealing with my own kids and in teaching in the HMEC mission and other weekend schools for over 9 years and doing guest lectures in high schools on Hinduism. Next slide, please. So we are one community of Hindus, even though we are very diverse. And so the question is, can we evolve a unified or common or a standard framework to transform mandirs into an avenue for education for all age groups, all backgrounds? So whenever we have a problem, we should first do a situation analysis. We should look at our strengths, our opportunities, threats, weaknesses. What do we have? And that's what I'm going to do today and see, what are the pointers that we derive out of the situation analysis and what learnings do we, draw from them. Next slide, please. So we all know that we have a huge infrastructure in the form of 800 to 1,000 temples in the United States alone. But, there's a problem. When our children go to the schools, their regular schools, everything is so well organized. Teachers have lesson plans. Whereas when they come to the temple, they often think that there's so much chaos. Everything is ad hoc, last minute. People are running, yelling at each other. Just last Sunday in our own temple, 4 parents attending the weekend school complained to me that there was yelling going on in the corridors and this is intimidating to the children. So the environment is very different and it tends to scare the kids away. So when we want to transform temples as a venue for education, it has to be done with a lot of professionalism. The curriculum should be very structured, rigid in its form. But when you're delivering it in the classroom, it should be very easy on children. We should not compete with the regular schools. We will lose. So weekend school is not a 6th day of school. It is a place where the kids can really enjoy and discover who they are. The other thing is that, a lot of parents, they keep on drilling in their children, we are Indians, we are Indians. And I've actually had teenagers tell me on my face, I am not an Indian. My parents came from India, I am from an Indian background, but I am an American. So we should not teach Hindu religion, Hindu dharma as an India-centric tradition. We are actually the most global and universal tradition in the whole world. So why doesn't that reflect in the way we teach Hinduism to our students? So let's go to the next slide. So when we start talking about Hindu dharma to our students, we tell them, first of all, whatever your parents tell you, you are not guests in this country. This is your country. It's a country of immigrants. Even when your parents took the oath to American citizenship, they were told that they have the same rights as any other American citizen, even if their forefathers came 4 centuries back or 5 centuries back on the Mayflower. So this is your country, and the religion, Hindu dharma, is not a foreign religion. It's the religion of the people who live here in the US. Next slide. Next slide, please. And we tell them how deeply our beliefs and traditions have penetrated into all walks of the American society. So next slide. The next thing we observe is that let's not confuse Hindu dharma with Indianness. A lot of our children are marrying into non-Indian ethnicities. And in my own case, my family members started moving to this country in 1956. Now I have 4th generation people in my family. And sometimes they call themselves Krindu, and I don't know, they only have like a 4th of Indian blood. Can you really call them Indians? But you can still call themselves Hindus if they choose to identify themselves as such. So, and then we have Hindus in our own school in the mandir. We have Hindus from Sri Lanka, Pakistan, immigrants from Kenya, and of course we have Canada, from Trinidad. Now you cannot tell them that we will start our school assembly with Jane Gane Man. That is not going to go very well. So the curriculum has to be very inclusive. The other thing is that we've looked at some curriculums and there's a very distinct, focus on, say, the Vaishnavite traditions. And, that should not be the case. We have to be very inclusive in our curriculum. And there are very good curriculums available out there, the Chinmay Mission and the Swami Narayan and Ramakrishna Mission. And we should try to use all of these curriculums available to us, not necessarily brand ourselves as separate, but draw on the good points. Next slide, please. So here's just a slide to tell the children that sometimes even children who are born and raised here use the word American to refer to whites, as if they are less Americans than others. But that's not true. Like I said, Hindus are from many different countries. Next slide. The other second situation analysis that we do is that their frame of reference here is Christianity and Judaism. It's almost like you have to translate Hindu concepts to them through Christianity and Judaism. So eventually we don't want them to understand our own tradition through borrowed eyes, but that's how you would start. And actually, when you go into higher classes, there should be a lot of interfaith perspectives. A lot of times we get invitations to talk about Hindu Dharma in churches. What we don't realize is that it could be because they have a world religions class and so they want a Hindu speaker. Or maybe they are sending a mission trip to India, so they want to learn the inside story and then be more successful at converting. But we must have interfaith perspectives and explain what is our perspective of Abrahamic traditions. Now there are some very good language programs, especially in Telugu and Tamil in the Bay Area. In the Twin Cities itself, there's a Tamil school which has 400 children. Studying Tamil all the way to Sangam level Tamil. Now, I think they're doing a pretty good service, but unfortunately, it often happens at the cost of teaching religion to students. And, my question to these parents is, you have to see through the eyes of your child, what is it that's going to be important to your community 2 generations from now? It's really a losing battle. You cannot preserve your language beyond the 3rd or the 4th generation. The one aspect of our being which we can sustain through generation after generation is our dharma. So our focus should be on dharma. Now, if you've gone to the madrasas, how many languages do they teach? Do they teach Somali? Do they teach Arabic? Do they teach Berber? Or do they teach Bahasa Indonesia? They don't. They only focus on one language typically, and that's Arabic. Whether you go to the Shia madrasa or the Sunni madrasa. So we should teach language as a medium to our culture, but the focus should always be our dharmic heritage. Next, please. And like I said, interfaith perspective, here's a slide created by a friend of mine where we compare, face to face, and actually the obvious conclusion is that Abrahamic religions don't have anything compared to the Parabrahm of our tradition. Next slide. And we've already, the curriculum should be very relevant to our lives. We have learned about our dharma, in different ways. The kids today, they learn a lot of things electronically. In our school district, an iPad is mandatory. They don't even have paper textbooks. Let's not fight technology. We have to embrace it. And an example I was giving to someone earlier was that last week, we started Introduction to the Bhagavad Gita class. The first topic of discussion was, why should I even study the Gita? So at the end of the slideshow, I said, let's have this 4G phone in our heart and go Gita, Ganga, Gayatri. And somebody said, why not the iPhone? And I said, because Gita is not about I, me, mine. It's about we and us. So somebody said, well, if I don't worship Krishna, not Govinda, if I worship another deity, I said, well, you can substitute Govinda by Ganesha or Gauri or Girijesh. But our religion allows us a lot of flexibility, and through that 4G, they will remember what I meant. Next slide, please. So I'll skip this slide, next slide. We should use modern ways of teaching about our dharma. The books should be very multicolored. We should use, videos. We just saw a beautiful video on Hindu Dharma. The HAF and the Himalayan Academy has produced beautiful brochures. We should try to leverage all that material to teach. And the curriculum should be very age appropriate. Again, what we found is that parents can force their children to come to these weekend schools as long as they are in elementary schools, but as soon as they're in the 6th grade, 7th grade, they don't want to go there. It's very uncool, it's boring, there's only chanting. So we shouldn't patronize our children, we shouldn't consider them as dumb. There should be enough intellectual stimulation in their curriculum. Next slide, please. So here's just pictures, and we'll talk more about this in session 6.8. But I just point out that if you see that book, when we talk about the Puranas, we focus on all the traditions, sampradayas in our dharma. Next slide. We'll talk about this in 6A, where we explain why we came up with this framework. Next slide. There's a lot of misinformation about Hindu dharma, and in my own son's case, they talked about the caste system in the school. When he came back home, I asked him, so what was the reaction? What did your teacher tell you about Hindu dharma? So he said, well, it was only about caste system and untouchability. So I said, well, so what was your reaction? He said, I knew she was talking all rubbish, because we had studied in our own school that the Varna and Jati systems, they are much more complex, and they had a lot of advantages also. So there is no purifier than knowledge, and when we teach them about Hindu dharma, we should also constantly keep in mind what Donigers and these people are teaching in the universities, and in a very subtle way try to answer those negatives. Next slide, please. Like people say India is poor because of Hindu dharma, so we show them this chart that if Hindu dharma is the cause of poverty, we should have been poor all along. And next slide. Next slide. Don't shy away from challenges. If you don't give children answers to the questions that face them, they will find their own answers, which not be to our liking. So things like dating, interfaith marriages are real, questions in their mind, and we have to provide them with a Hindu perspective. Next slide. For example, we've heard teenager girls saying, I'm not a commodity which can be given away in a kanyadan. So you have to actually explain to them what kanyadan means and how prominent the role of Devi is in our tradition. Next slide. Let's just skip. Next slide. Next. The one thing I want to emphasize is that you can force your elementary school children to come to school, but by the time they're teenagers and no longer interested, it's all a waste. Now, when it comes to teenagers, you have to reflect internally, what is it that you can offer to them? And teenagers are very busy, and they need voluntary hours. They will not sit in a class as a student, so you need to co-opt them as core teachers, and they actually do a very fabulous job. Ask them to send the weekly summary to the parents. When they do that, they will actually pay attention in what's going on in the class, what the adult teacher is teaching, and they really like to do things like dancing, learn about doing things in the culture. Next slide. So what we did was we formed a teenager organization, and we have so many teenagers volunteering in the mandir right now that one group could not accommodate all of them for the Diwali program. Now, as I'm speaking here, actually they are doing their Ratri before Navratri program in the mandir right now. And typically we get 400 to 500 people, and every year they raise like $2,000 for the mandir. Next slide. And they are a very good agent for outreach the way we cannot. So this is a program that they did, and if you can see, almost a third of them are of non-Indian origin. Next slide. And I'll just talk about, the last point is that now after 5 years of our teenager group, some of them have graduated and gone into college, and it's so encouraging to see that when they still come back to visit their parents, they still see the mandir as their own home. There are teenagers who graduated from high school 2 years back, but they actually, when they were here in summer, they choreographed the Diwali dances, and they're actually flying in to see the Mandir Diwali program. So it's a long haul, and we need to provide enough opportunities to students. Next slide. Next. For adults, we heard about the Bhagavad Gita classes. The one thing I want to say is that that will attract only a portion of the adults. There are many other different ways in which we should attract other segments of our target market, whether it's a book club or an alpha course or specialized classes. And so we should make the mandir a one-stop shop for education. So that's all I would like to say, that people have different needs and there are different ways in they learn, and the mandir should provide these different avenues for people to learn about our dharma. There is a slide on interfaith education, but I think Vishal Agarwal ji already covered all that, so I'll skip that. Thank you.